The ATM screen refreshed and I pressed the balance button again. $3.11. I stood there holding my card in the cold morning air and pressed it one more time. $3.11. My chest did something strange, like a door slamming shut inside me. That account held $18,000 when I left for work that morning. My rent. My safety net. The money I had been stacking for 2 years through overtime hours and skipped weekends, building it carefully because I knew this industry punishes people who look financially weak. $18,000. Then my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out with fingers that had gone completely numb and read the message on the screen. My sister Naomi had sent it 4 minutes ago. That's for what you did to me at work. We're even now. I read it once. Read it again. I stood at that machine with the cold pressing into my face and said the word out loud to no one. Even. She thought this made us even. Whatever she thought she was settling, she had just made a mistake that crossed from family into something far more serious. I called her immediately. She picked up on the first ring, which told me everything. You do not pick up on the first ring unless you have been waiting, sitting with your phone face up, watching the screen, rehearsing. Her voice was calm. Not nervous, not guilty, not the voice of someone who had done something they were uncertain about. Calm in the specific way of a person who had been building toward a moment and had finally arrived at it. Don't act surprised, Cynthia. You started this. I kept my hand flat against the cold brick wall behind me and said nothing for a moment. In the background I could hear her keyboard clicking. She was typing. She had just drained my bank account and she was at her desk working as if it were any other Tuesday. What exactly do you think I started? Said. My voice was quieter than I expected. She let out a short sound that was not quite a laugh. You know what you did, she said. We're square. I heard her chair adjust slightly. I opened my mouth and she hung up. Just like that. I stood on the pavement holding a dead call. She had planned every part of it. I had been the only one without a script. My name is Cynthia Whitaker and I have been building my career at Hartwell Marketing for 6 years. I started at the bottom, answering phones and chasing approvals. I am now a senior campaign strategist. That climb did not happen because anyone handed it to me. I fought for every client, every promotion, every room I was allowed to sit in. I learned to look certain even when terrified and I got very good at it. 16 months ago, Naomi asked if I could help her get a position at the company. She had a background in digital communications and there was an opening on the content team. I said yes without thinking twice. I vouched for her in the hiring meeting, coached her interview, introduced her to the people who mattered. She got the job. For the first few months, everything was fine. We kept work and family separate the way you are supposed to. We were professional in the office and sisters everywhere else. That version of things lasted about 4 months. Then something shifted in a way I did not notice at first because I was too close to it. You rarely see the first crack forming. You just look up one day and realize it has been there for a long time. 2 months ago I walked into a client meeting with a campaign concept I had spent 3 weeks developing. Audience research, messaging architecture, channel strategy. All of it built carefully. I laid it out clearly. The room went quiet in the specific way that sometimes means people are thinking and sometimes means they are not moved. Then Naomi leaned forward from her chair 2 seats down from me. She restated my concept. Not word for word but close enough that anyone paying attention would have recognized it as mine. She added a single sentence about content timing that was hers. The room lit up. Our manager Philip nodded and pointed at her. An account director wrote something down. 2 people smiled. I sat with my hands folded on the table and kept my face completely neutral while they built on her version of my idea for 4 minutes. Afterward I told myself she had probably absorbed it from our conversations and had not realized she was repeating it. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. That was the first time she took something from me and it cost me nothing visible. But she had seen what happened when she stepped into my spotlight. And she had liked it. After that meeting things changed in ways that were easy to dismiss one at a time but impossible to ignore together. Philip started giving Naomi the accounts with client-facing visibility. The ones that get you noticed in quarterly reviews. The ones that make you a name. I was getting work that was technically important but had no showcase value. Operational accounts, the kind that keep the company running but never get mentioned in strategy meetings. My feedback from Philip shifted. He started using words like overextended and suggested my communication style could be sharper. When I asked for specific examples, he was vague in a way that told me he was not speaking from his own observations. He was reflecting something back that he had heard somewhere else. I went home on a Thursday night and tried to be honest with myself. My work had not changed. My clients were satisfied. But my standing in that building was shrinking in a way I could feel even in the small moments, the way people made eye contact in the corridor, or the fraction of a second before they decided not to. Something was being said about me in rooms I was not invited to. I did not know yet how long it had been going on. A colleague named Priscilla pulled me aside one afternoon near the copy room. She spoke quickly and quietly, the way people do when they are giving you information that makes them slightly uncomfortable. She said it had been happening in smaller moments. Coffee runs 10 minutes before calls. Naomi had been telling people things. That I had always been controlling even growing up. That I had pushed her toward this company because I liked having influence over her career. That I found it difficult when she succeeded on her own. None of it was said loudly or angrily. It was said softly, sadly, the way you speak about someone you genuinely feel sorry for. That is the most effective kind of campaign because it does not look like a campaign. It looks like a tired woman quietly telling the truth about a difficult relationship. Priscilla looked at me when she finished and I thanked her and walked back to my desk. I sat down and kept working. But I was no longer dismissing anything. Everything I had been explaining away. The missed credit, the cool looks, Philip's shifting feedback, was not a series of coincidences. It was a structure. Someone had been building it carefully, and she had been using my own trust as the foundation. HR called me in on a Wednesday morning. The representative's name was Dorcas, and she had the practiced neutral face of someone who runs difficult conversations for a living. She said the company had received concerns about workplace dynamics involving a family member in the same department. She used specific phrases: professional boundary questions, impact on team environment, patterns of interpersonal behavior. She never said Naomi's name directly. She did not need to. I was the only person in that building with a sister working 3 floors up. I asked what I had specifically done. She said the process involved gathering information from multiple parties, and she was not able to share individual statements at this stage. I sat in that chair and understood what had happened. Naomi had not just whispered in hallways. She had used HR's formal complaint process. She had submitted something in writing with a paper trail. She had read the employee handbook or talked to someone who had, and she had used it correctly. I told Dorcas I would cooperate fully with any review. I did not defend myself emotionally in that room. Not because I had nothing to say. Because reacting emotionally in front of HR was exactly what Naomi expected. I was done doing that. I spent a Sunday afternoon at my kitchen table going back through everything with different eyes. Naomi had borrowed my laptop 3 months earlier when hers had a battery issue before a presentation. I had handed it over without a second thought. 6 weeks after that, I had locked myself out of my bank account during an app update and she had offered to help me through the password recovery process. I was tired and frustrated and I sat beside her while she walked me through the steps, which meant she had seen my new password as I typed it. I had not thought about it at the time because you do not think about those things with your sister. You hand over your laptop. You let her sit next to you. You are grateful because she is helping. That is the point. She had wanted me to be grateful. She had wanted the access. And she had been patient about using it. She had waited through the HR complaint, through the client project, through weeks of professionally weakening my standing. She had waited until the exact moment when I was most likely to look unstable and least likely to be believed. That was not impulsive. That was a timeline built backward from a planned ending. The client project I am referring to was the Carver Financial Campaign, one of the company's most important third-quarter deliverables. I had been leading it for 2 months. The concept was solid. The timeline was realistic. I had checked every dependency and confirmed every approval at every stage. Then, 3 days before the final presentation, 2 core deliverable documents on the shared drive had been edited in ways that introduced subtle errors, the kind that would not be obvious at a glance but would become clear when a client examined the numbers closely. Key research files were also missing from the folder. The presentation went forward, but it went badly. The client asked questions we could not answer cleanly. They left the meeting without committing to the next phase. Philip sent me a formal note that afternoon asking for a written explanation of what had gone wrong. I wrote it carefully and submitted it within the hour. I focused on the file irregularities and the timeline of the edits. But without proof of who had made those changes, it was my explanation sitting against a project record that had my name at the top. I was the lead. The accountability sat with me. That is how she had designed it. The team meeting the following morning was the worst 20 minutes of my professional life. Philip addressed the Carver situation directly and asked the group to reflect on what could have been done differently. Nobody volunteered anything specific. Then Naomi spoke. Her voice was measured and soft, the voice she had been practicing for months. She said she had tried to support me throughout the project, but had noticed I seemed stretched thin in the final week. She said she wished she had pushed harder to offer help. She said it with her hands folded on the table and her eyes fixed on Philip with an expression of genuine, regretful concern. The room absorbed it quietly. A few heads nodded slightly. I looked at her from across the table. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Philip the way you look at someone when you want them to see you at your most reasonable. My nails pressed into my palm under the table. I did not speak. Every word I said in that room would feed the version of me she had built. The only thing that could correct it was evidence, and to get that I had to stay where I was and let her keep going. That same afternoon I checked my phone during a break and found the bank notification. $3.11. I stood in the stairwell reading the number and understood for the first time the full shape of what she had constructed. She had not done this out of anger. Anger is sloppy. It acts too early and leaves fingerprints everywhere. This was not that. She had waited until the Carver project was in ruins and my name was attached to the failure. She had waited until HR had an active file on my behavior. She had waited until people in that building were already forming softer opinions about my stability. Then she had moved the money. Because a person who is already professionally shaken and suddenly loses $18,000 does not look like a victim. They look like someone in crisis. They look like someone whose judgment is impaired. They look exactly like the person that Naomi had been describing in quiet corners for months. She needed me destabilized financially so that when I reported what she had done, the story that surrounded me would make the report look like the reaction of someone falling apart. She had counted on my reaction to be loud and visible. She would not get that. That evening I opened my banking app and traced every line of the transaction. The transfer had not gone to Naomi's personal checking account. It had gone to a business account registered to a company called Nomad Digital Collective. I recognized the name immediately. She had been mentioning it at work for weeks, dropping references to investors and launch timelines in the casual way people do when they want something to sound real and growing. She had talked about it over lunch with the account managers. She had mentioned it in passing to Philip in a way that I now understood was not passing at all. She was building a professional identity separate from our family connection, and she had used my $18,000 as the foundation capital. She needed the business to look funded so that people at Hartwell Marketing would see her as someone with real outside momentum. Someone worth investing their professional attention in. Someone climbing. My money was not just stolen. It was converted into credibility in the exact workplace where she had been dismantling mine. She had taken my account and my reputation at the same time and used one to undermine the other. The next morning I called my bank from my car before going inside the office. I asked to speak with the Fraud and Unauthorized Access Department. The representative confirmed that the transaction had originated from a recognized device and that the login credentials matched, which was why no automatic flag had been triggered. I told her I understood that, and that I was reporting the access as unauthorized because the credentials had been obtained without my consent during a password recovery session I could document by date. My voice was steady. I explained the circumstances clearly and without emotion, The session, the date, the amount, the receiving account name. She opened a case number and told me to come into a branch with documentation. I said I would come today. I ended the call, sat in the car one more moment, and recognized the shift happening inside me. I was not reacting anymore. Something had reorganized itself in the past 12 hours, and what I felt now was not panic or anger or grief. It was the specific focus of a person who has decided what they are going to do and is now simply doing it in the correct order. I put my phone away, got out of the car, and smiled at the front desk. At work that day, I gave Naomi nothing to work with. I said good morning when we passed in the hall. I replied to her messages on the shared project channel with professional brevity. In the afternoon team meeting, I presented my section of the weekly update without a single stumble. She watched me throughout the day with an attention she was trying to disguise as casual. I could see it at the edges of her glances. She was waiting for something. A tremor in my delivery. An error in my numbers. A flash of emotion that would confirm everything she had spent weeks quietly saying about me. I understood exactly what she was waiting for because I had finally understood exactly how her plan worked. Every piece of it depended on my reaction. The campaign against my reputation only stuck because people expected someone like me, stressed, defensive, visibly strained, to behave badly under pressure. Her HR complaint only gained weight if I responded emotionally to it. The bank theft only devastated me if I fell apart publicly. She had built her entire strategy around predictable responses, so I gave her the only thing that could disrupt the whole structure. I gave her nothing. I was calm. I was prepared. I was completely, visibly fine. Over the next 3 days, I requested my full login history from the bank, which included device identification and session timestamps. I went to IT under the premise of resolving the Carver file discrepancies and asked for an access log export from the shared project drive. The IT manager, a careful and quiet man named Brennan, processed the request without asking why I needed it. He handed me a full export of who had accessed which files and at what time. I spent Saturday morning at my kitchen table going through it line by line with a legal pad beside me. Naomi had accessed the Carver deliverable documents at 11:18 on a Tuesday night and made changes across 4 files in intervals of 30 to 40 minutes. Deliberate edits, not accidental ones. No one else had touched those files that night. Then I looked at her public social media. Over the past 3 weeks, she had posted twice about making a significant investment in her business and building toward a launch. She had documented her own use of funds she should not have had, posting the evidence of her own motive in the same place she had been sharing updates with colleagues. The window she had used to build her image had become the record of her downfall. I walked into the bank branch at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning dressed the way I dressed for new client meetings. Jacket, structured bag, everything in a labeled folder. I sat across from the fraud specialist, a man named Garrett who took notes by hand in a small green notebook and wore reading glasses on a chain. I placed each document in front of him in the order that told the clearest story. The banking login history with device details and timestamp. The date of the password recovery session with Naomi. The transfer amount and the receiving account registered to Nomad Digital Collective. The IT access logs showing the Carver file edits from the same period. The social media posts showing the business was being publicly presented as funded. I answered his questions carefully and waited while he read each page. When he reached the social media printouts, he looked up briefly and went back to reading. When I finished presenting, he removed his glasses and said the evidence I had brought suggested a pattern the bank would need to investigate formally. He said depending on the outcome, the receiving account would likely need to be flagged. The word he used was frozen. I thanked him and left. The days that followed were the hardest part of the entire process because there was nothing left for me to do except continue showing up. Naomi was at her peak during that week. She had a new client relationship she was championing, and Philip had assigned her the lead on a campaign proposal that had real visibility. She talked about her startup over lunch with 2 of the account managers, using language that was new. Scaling thoughtfully, strategic investment, controlled growth. She moved through the office with the confidence of someone who believed the game was already over and they had won it. I sat in my usual seat in the usual meetings and watched all of it with the stillness of someone waiting for something they know is coming. I'd done everything I could do. The bank had the evidence. The IT logs were on record. The process was moving without me now. There was nothing left to do except be exactly who I had always been. Prepared, consistent, professionally present. I had learned by then that the most powerful position in a situation like this is simply being undeniably fine when everyone expects you to be falling apart. I was presenting in a review meeting on a Thursday afternoon when it happened. I was 2 slides into a quarterly summary, speaking clearly, when I heard a chair scrape sharply across the floor from the open plan area beyond the glass wall behind me. I did not stop. I kept my eyes on the people in the room and my voice on the same even pace. But in my peripheral vision I could see Naomi standing at her desk with her phone pressed hard against her ear. Her free hand was flat on the desk surface the way you press down when you need something solid. Her body had gone completely still in the particular way that means the brain is working very fast to process something it was not prepared for. Then her voice cut through the glass. High and tight and controlled but not quite controlled enough. "What do you mean frozen?" The words landed in the space between my slides. A few heads in the open area turned. I continued speaking to my room. I did not look toward the glass. I did not change my expression or my pacing or the volume of my voice. But something in my chest released quietly, the way a stuck latch finally gives when you find the right angle. By the next morning the office had its own momentum. 2 of Naomi's vendor contacts had apparently tried to run payments through Nomad Digital Collective, and the transactions had not cleared. I heard this from the account assistant, who had overheard one of the calls and mentioned it to a colleague while refilling her water bottle near the kitchen. Word moved the way it always moves in a small office, quickly and without anyone appearing to push it. By noon a low current of attention was running through the floor. People were noticing things about Naomi's behavior that were new. She was checking her phone more often than usual. The easy confidence that had been her constant presence for months was slightly off, the way a performance goes slightly off when the performer stops believing in it. Vendors were calling. Payments were bouncing. The business she had been publicly celebrating for weeks was visibly stalled. Nobody had connected it to me yet. That was exactly how I needed it to stay. The story was beginning to correct itself, and the worst thing I could have done was attach my name to the correction before it was complete. The story was correcting itself. I only had to stay out of its way. The bank's investigation moved into its formal phase the following week. Garrett called me to confirm that based on the evidence I had provided, the access logs, the session timestamps, the social media documentation, and the account history, they were treating the transfer as unauthorized. He said the receiving business account would remain frozen and that a fraud determination was being prepared. He told me to expect a formal letter by the end of the week and to contact them if anything further surfaced. I thanked him and ended the call. 2 days later, Naomi stopped coming to work. No out-of-office message, no announcement from Philip, no explanation sent to the team. She was simply absent. A business account that had been frozen. Vendors who could not be paid. A fraud investigation at a financial institution with her name attached to it. A professional image she had spent months carefully building, now associated with a process that was very publicly going the wrong direction. When you construct something elaborate on a foundation that does not belong to you, it does not just fall. It falls in exactly the direction you built it, and it takes everything above it down with it. HR called me in for a second meeting and the difference from the first one was immediate. Dorcas's posture was different. She was not reading from a managed script. She was direct in a way that told me the conversation had a different purpose this time. She said the company had been reviewing the Carver project documentation as part of a broader internal audit. She said IT had flagged access patterns they considered unusual, and that those findings had been formally reviewed. She did not tell me specifics about what the review had concluded, but the questions she asked were precise and focused on timeline. Who was on the project, in what capacity, who had access to which files at which stages. I had been over every detail of that timeline so many times in the past 2 weeks that I answered without hesitation. When the meeting ended, Dorcas said something she had not said in our first meeting. She said the company took these situations seriously and appreciated my cooperation through a difficult period. It was not a long statement, but the tone of it was not the careful neutrality of an organization managing its exposure. It was the specific directness of people who had found something they needed to correct and were beginning to correct it. Naomi was terminated on a Friday. There was no announcement. Her system access was removed and her badge was deactivated. I know this because Brennan from IT mentioned it practically while asking if I needed any shared project files transferred before her account was fully closed. I said yes, gave him the folder names and thanked him. That was the whole conversation. There was no scene, no public confrontation, no moment that looked the way these endings look in the movies people make about workplace drama. She was simply gone from the building the way a file gets deleted. The space it occupied remains for a moment and then closes. Her business account was still frozen. The vendors she had committed to with my money remained unpaid. The investors she had hinted at to colleagues were left with a story that had ended very differently from the version she had been telling. I sat at my desk after Brennan left and held the quiet for a moment. Not triumph. Not the sharp satisfaction I had imagined during the worst weeks of all this. Just the particular stillness of something very loud finally going silent, and the slow return of breathing that felt normal again. The bank's ruling came by email on a Wednesday morning. The subject line read fraud case resolution, and I opened it at my kitchen table with both hands around a coffee mug. The determination confirmed the transfer as unauthorized. The full amount would be returned in stages as the receiving account was processed and formally closed. Every dollar traced. Every dollar returned. I read it twice without moving. $18,000. 2 years of overtime and skipped weekends and careful discipline. My rent. My safety net. The money she had taken not just to hurt me but to build something for herself in the same space where she had been trying to make me smaller. She had timed the theft for maximum disruption. She had placed the money where it would give her the most visible credibility. She had documented her own use of it publicly. And all of those choices, the ones she had made with such deliberate precision, were the exact same choices that had made the fraud case clear and the ruling straightforward. She had been too careful in the wrong direction. She had planned so thoroughly that she had left a record of everything.
A month after Naomi left the company, Philip called me into his office for a conversation that had a different quality from everyone before it. He said the Carver project had been formally reviewed and that the conclusions had been shared with senior leadership. He told me the company was reassigning me to a larger client portfolio that had recently opened up. He used the word reassignment, but the context made the meaning plain. This was the kind of move that gets noted in year-end evaluations. He said my consistency, through a complicated period, had not gone unnoticed. I thanked him and went back to my desk. The same colleagues who had nodded quietly when Naomi said I was overwhelmed were now watching me with a different kind of attention. Not guilt exactly, more the careful recalibration of people who had formed an opinion and discovered it was built on information that turned out to be wrong. I did not hold any of it against them. People believe the stories they are given when the stories are told softly and sadly by someone who looks like they have nothing to gain. That is not stupidity. That is how people work. What changed things was not anger or defense. It was the paper trail. I have not spoken to Naomi since the afternoon she hung up the phone on me at that ATM. Not as punishment. Not to make a point. Because what she showed me over those months was a complete and detailed picture of who she was when she believed she could not be caught, and I have no use for that version of a person in my life. She called what she did payback. But that word assumes I did something that required paying back. What I actually did was get hired before her, get promoted ahead of her, and build something in a place where she also wanted to stand. I helped her get into the room, and she used the access I gave her to try to push me out of it. She took the password I let her see, the trust one operated from, and the project I had spent months building, and turned all of it into instruments. The money came back. The project record was corrected. The promotion came through. But the thing that changed most is harder to name. I stopped giving trust automatically to people who have not earned it. She called it payback. What it turned out to be was the clearest instruction I have ever received.